Hello again, Internet. Astro with Roro here again, back for part 2 of creating super simple mosaics with Nina. So in the previous video, we set up Nina and captured all of our data. Now we've got all of that data sitting in 2 separate panels. Today we're going to take that data, bring it into Pixinsights and combine it into a single panel so we can do our final edits on it. Now this is not a tutorial on how to fully edit images in Pixinsights. So we'll only be going over some of the most basic settings using the weighted batch pre-processing script, a few minor tweaks to bring background levels down, then we'll be jumping straight into the mosaic side. If you would like to see a full Pixinsights tutorial, then leave a comment down in the description and I'll make sure that I get onto that video later. So to get started, let's dive in and create our 2 base images that we're going to be working off. So in Pixinsights, you want to come up to Script, Batch Processing, Weighted Batch Pre-Processing. We are going to reset this here and first add in our lights. Now I'm going to start with my mosaic panel 1 here, dive in, grab all of the lights here. I imaged this over 3 different nights to get a bit more data, so I'm going to dive in here and add all the lights from all 3 of those nights into one. Now usually you would add flats in for each of the different nights, but I'm going to be a little bit lazy here and just add in 1 set of flats. I know that my image chain hasn't changed and these were back-to-back nights, so there shouldn't be too much difference between all of the flats. We now have our lights, some flats, and then we need to add in some dark and dark flats. Now these don't have to be taken at the same time as your imaging if you have a cooled camera. So I'm going to go into my dark library here. My flats were taken at 30 seconds. So I'm going to grab all of these dark flats, which matches the 30 seconds of my flats. And then my lights were taken at 240 seconds. So I'm going to jump back and go 240 seconds and add in all of my darks. In the output directory here, I'm going to jump into Cygnus Loop Mosaic Panel 1, create a new folder, which I like to call Pix or Pixinsights, and select that folder. We can just leave auto detect reference frame on here, that is fine. Now you may have noticed that I'm not doing any sub selection, and that is to keep this tutorial as simple as possible. If you're looking to get the most out of your mosaics, then you should follow a dedicated tutorial on how to create the best images in stacking in Pixinsights. That would mean going in, choosing the best subs, getting rid of any subs that have any issues with cloud or anything like that. But for this, I'm just going to keep it really simple. So we are now ready to run. So we can hit run. It's going to mention that we don't have any bias frames, but that is fine. Bias frames are not needed for modern CMOS sensors if you use dark flats, which we are using. We will hit continue here and let this process run. And we have finished the first of our 2 panels. So we're going to click done here and this time set up for our second panel. So we need to clear all of our light frames and all of our flat frames and re-add in our lights and flats from the second panel. So I'm going to start with the flats. Make sure you're in panel 2 this time. There we go, 5 flats, and then add in our light frames. Once again, I did image this panel over multiple nights, so I'm going to go and add in the second night now as well. All right, there we go, and we have our light frames. Don't forget to update the output directory, this time into Mosaic Panel 2. Create that Pix folder, select the folder, run, and hit continue. Now this may take some time again, so do something nice for yourself. I am going to go and make myself a nice cup of tea. And there we are, we're done with our second panel. And got myself a nice little cuppa here. So let's continue on with some basic editing of these 2 panels before we combine them in our mosaic. So we can now exit the weighted batch pre-processing script. Jump into the folders, go into the master folder and select the master light. Drag that into Pixinsights and let's do the same for panel 2. Okay, we can get rid of the rejection high and the rejection low for each of our panels. Let's do a quick auto stretch on both of these to make sure that what we've got is looking all right to start with. Now we can see there's definitely some gradients going on here. This is most likely due to the fact that I shot these low on the horizon and there's a lot of light pollution in the areas to which I was shooting. But we can get rid of that with some quick tricks. We're then going to do a really quick automatic background extraction here. So I'm going to come up to Processes, All Processes, Automatic Background Extractor, and just leave it at the defaults and let's see what happens here. Drag it over and it should bring up the background. We can see, yes, it is capturing that gradient in the background there. So we can close that, open our target image correction, change the correction to subtraction, discard the background model because we know it's okay, and we're going to replace the target image so that this image here ends up being the edited one. Drag it over again, and you can see it's done a decent job, but there is still a little bit of weird background going down on the bottom here. But that's probably good enough for the moment. Next, let's do the same thing to our second panel. So once again, I'm going to get rid of both of these, change the correction back to none, drop it over, and let's just make sure the background looks okay here. It looks, yeah, it's dark in the corner, looking brighter over this side. That looks okay to me. We're going to go correction, subtraction, discard background model, replace target image, drag it over again, and that looks much, much better. Now, I'm not quite happy with how the background looks in our first panel here, so I'm going to go up and do a dynamic background extraction so we can get a little bit more detail as to how we want to make that background model. So select dynamic background extraction, click on the target image, which in this case is my panel 1. Okay, so I'm going to increase the tolerance here to about 1, increase the default radius to 25, and then let's hit generate and see what samples it's going to create for us. Okay, that doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to add in a few extras, especially see if we can get some down in this corner down here. Now it's saying some of these aren't valid, but we can definitely get a couple more down in here. This is where we really want to focus them if we can. Okay, and some up in this corner. Now we definitely want to delete all of these ones here that are over the nebula. We do not want any that are over the nebula, so I'm going to click on one at the top and then just click delete, and then every time it goes to a new one, if it's sort of towards the middle, I'm going to get rid of that. And you want to make sure that they're nowhere near the nebulosity, because even though you can't see it, there's a lot of faint nebulosity that is quite close. So you really want to make sure there's a decent sort of amount of space around each of these regions here. That one looks fine. Get rid of those there, and I'm going to say, cool, that's probably good there. So now again, we're just going to leave it as it is, hit the little tick this time and see what background metal it builds for us. Okay, that's getting a little bit more of the brightness down in there. That's definitely looking a little bit better. So we're going to do subtraction, discard background model, replace target image, and see how this comes out. Okay, that's definitely looking quite a bit better. So now we can close dynamic background extraction. And I'm going to do a little bit of noise reduction on each of these just before we jump into our mosaics. So first up, I'm going to create a new copy of each of them just by grabbing on the side here and dragging it out. I'm going to go to Process, All Processes, Screen Transfer Function, and open up this little window, as well as Process, All Processes, and come down to Histogram Transformation, which will bring up this window. Click on one of the clones that you created, and then come down to the bottom here and click this Nuclear Auto Stretch button. This will create a stretched version of the image. Drag it over onto this little bar down the bottom here of the histogram transformation. You'll see that it adjusts the curves value, and then drag this on top of that. It's going to go all white, but that's fine because up the top you'll be able to hit this screen with a cross which removes the auto stretch, and we now have a actual stretched version of this image. Repeat the same process with the other mosaic. Hit the stretch button, drag it across, unstretch, and we can close these two windows. These are going to be used as our masking so that we only edit the noise in the dark background sections and don't edit any of our actual nice nebulosity. So grab the side of our stretched images and drag it down to the side of the main image it was copied from. You'll get this nice little square coming up, and then you should see this red background. You can then minimize this and get it out the way, and do the same for the other one. And minimize this. You then want to right click, mask, invert mask, or Control-Shift-I. Similar here, we want to right click, mask, invert mask, or Control-Shift-I. This will mean that the brighter sections are now safe and not going to be impacted by any work that we do. We can then use Control-K or mask, show mask to make it so we don't see the mask, but we know it's still there because the side is orange. Come up to Process, All Process, Multiscale Linear Transform. This will bring up this window here. Here we can do a little bit of noise reduction. Click on the 1, 2, 3, and 4 lines and make sure noise reduction is enabled. For the first one, I like to go a little bit harsh, so I go 4 threshold with 80% amount, then 3 threshold with 60%, change the threshold to 2, 40%, and 1 at 20%. What this is doing is this is changing the amount of noise you want to reduce, less the larger the noise is. So on a layer 1 or a scale of 1, this is the tiniest noise on a individual pixel level. Then we start looking at noise across multiple pixels and bigger sections. So as it looks at larger noise levels, we want to get rid of less of it because it's less likely to be individual random photon noise. Then we can drag this across onto the image we want to do our noise reduction on. If we then zoom in here and do a undo, redo, you can see it is getting rid of a lot of that really small noise, which is exactly what we want, and just nicely smoothing out the background. But if we move over to some of the nebulosity here and zoom right in, undo, redo, you can see it's not impacting the nebulosity itself very much, which is exactly what we want. We do not want to impact that nebulosity. We want to keep it as, we want to keep all the detail there that we can. Just get rid of the noise in the background. So now we can do the same thing for our other panel. And zoom in here and you can check. Yes, that has definitely reduced a lot of the noise. Very nice. Now that is where we're going to leave it for our editing at the moment until we do our combination. If you'd like to do more editing, you absolutely can, but I'm going to leave it here so we can actually jump in to the meat of this tutorial. So right click, mask, remove mask from each of these photos. And we can get rid of those clones that we had earlier. That's fine, we don't need them anymore. Now you can see if I don't stretch these images, they are still in their original state. And that is what you want. You do not want these images to be stretched. If we re-stretch them, you can see now that we've reduced the noise, it's going to go and add a more extreme stretch onto them. That's fine. There are now 2 steps that we need to do to make a good mosaic. First, we need to make a rough mosaic. Then we can use that rough mosaic to create a nicely blended mosaic in the second part. So first off, making a rough mosaic. Go up to your processes, all processes, and come down to star alignment. We're going to use the stars in the background of these images so that we can perfectly overlap them. This is why in the first part of this tutorial, I said make sure you have a 15 to 25% overlap with your images. This will mean it can look at the stars in those areas and perfectly align them because there's enough stars to look at. So once you have the star alignment window opened up, you want to choose one of these 2 images as your reference image. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to pick the top one, which is our left image here. Next up, you want to come down to projective transformation and change it to thin plate splines. Then we want to tick distortion correction. Come down to working mode and do register union mosaic. This is going to combine the two images into one master mosaic image with them combined. You can increase your noise scales to 1, and this will help it to ignore the tiniest bit of noise and only look at real stars. Now we're ready to create our first rough mosaic. So grab this triangle and drop it over the one that you did not make your reference image of. Okay, what you should have here is a new image that has appeared. And if we stretch this, you can see that our two images have been aligned. You can ignore the fact that they look quite different at the moment. That is fine, and we'll adjust that later. All that matters now is that when you zoom in, you can see that the nebulosity does actually match up and the stars look good. So we'll just check over this side as well. And yeah, you can see that nebulosity does continue perfectly through there. So our images have aligned correctly. Next up, let's change our star alignment from mosaic to separate. And here, let's change the reference image from our first mosaic over to this mosaic combined panel that we just made. Now we want to drag across this onto each of our original mosaics. It's going to create two images for us. Keep the one with the black background in it. The other one is a copy, and we can just delete that. Once again, drag it onto the second panel of images we have and let it do the same thing. Once again, get rid of the combined one and leave it so that you have these two images now. Now we can close our star alignment, minimize our original images, and we are left with these two images here. Now, you might be thinking, why did we go through all of that just to create two separate images with this black section? And that is because for this second section, we are going to generate a mosaic where instead of them being completely different, they are blended together really nicely. So to do this, we want to come up to Process, All Processes, Gradient Merge Mosaic. This will open up a window. Now, to do this, you need two saved files, not two open files. So I'm going to save each of these files. I'm going to call the first one 1, and the second one 2. I know, very original of me. Now, under Gradient Merge Mosaics, we will add files, choose the two files that we just saved, and come down and make sure that the type of combination is on Overlay. You can leave the other two fine for the moment. Then we want to hit Apply Global. This is going to take those two images and put them on top of each other. And because we have a black background where one of them will be and the image is on the other, then it's going to overwrite that black image with the image of the other one. So the order of the two target frames does actually matter, and you may find that you need to change that order to get the best result, especially as we start moving into the shrink radius and feather radius. But we now have our merged mosaic. So let's do an auto stretch and see how it went. Well, that's not too bad, but it's not great. If we zoom in here, we can see that in some sections here, it did a pretty good job. But then as we come over to the left, it did less of a good job. So I'm going to close this and start again with a higher feather radius. And let's give it another go. Okay, it did better, but we can still go higher again. Now we're starting to get somewhere, but before I take this as my final example, I'm gonna swap the two around in the Gradient Merge Mosaic and see if that gives me a better result. So I just clicked on the first one, moved it down so that number 2 is on top, and we'll apply Global again. Okay, let's see how this one worked in comparison. You know, I think this one actually worked better. If we come over to the left side here and zoom in, it definitely looks like a nice and smoother transition through this section here. I'm just going to go all the way across this section here, and I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to get rid of that first one. We can minimize all of our other images in the background here. And now we have our fully merged mosaic. Since we haven't stretched this image yet, we can still do a lot of editing to this. But the first thing that I'm going to do is come up and go dynamic crop. That will bring up a little window here. Click on this image, and then down the bottom right, hit this little 4 arrows pointing together. Zoom out a little bit, and you will see an edge. You can then move this edge to create the crop that you are most happy with. So I'm just going to pull it in a little bit. Increase the size of this image a bit so I can see it a bit better. I think something like that looks pretty good. Once you're happy with the crop, hit the execute button, and there we have it. Our nicely merged mosaic. Now you can go in and do your regular suite of editing here if you like, instead of doing it earlier. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is edit that background a bit so that we have a nice flat background. To start off, I'm going to do another automatic background extraction, and let's just see what the model it builds is. That's okay, but not that great. Instead, I'm actually going to go in and do a dynamic background extraction instead. Exactly the same as we did in the first run. Increase that tolerance slightly, increase the sample size. I'm going to go 30 this time because we're dealing with a much larger image. That is too many samples per row, so I'm going to bring that samples per row down to 5. There we go. That's better. And delete all of these ones in the middle that are near or on top of the nebulosity. We do not want any of them. That one's fine, and we'll get rid of this one. Gonna add some extra points in, especially around this dark section in here that we want to focus on. Make sure it's nice and good across the top. All around the edge here. I'm not sure if it'll let me put it in the corner or won't. We'll move it out and see where it can actually put it. There we go. Also a little dark section just down in here, so I might add a couple more in there. I think maybe here as well. Can't tell if it's nebulosity or not, so I won't move it too close, but I definitely feel like there's a bit of a light band going through the middle here that I kind of want to focus on and see if I can get rid of. So I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and pop 1 or 2 in here and 1 right in here. Okay, let's see what sort of background model this makes for us. Well, I think that's a little bit better. I'm still not super happy with it. But let's see what happens. Let's do a subtraction, discarding, replacing target, auto stretch. Now, if you want to save this so that you can do it multiple times, grab the new instance, drag it onto the background, and then we can close it and give it a proper look. Okay, let's also do another automatic background extraction. Make sure subtraction, discarding and replacing. And that's not too bad at all. There's definitely a little bit of funkiness going on this right side here, but I reckon I can fix that up with a bit of manual work later in Photoshop. So there we have it. That is how you create a nicely blended mosaic in Pixinsights and Nina. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and it's been useful for you. If you did, please make sure to subscribe or like this video. My name is Rowan, this is Astro with Roro. Clear skies.